Wait for it. You're live.
Welcome, everybody, to this May 23rd, 2021 live stream. It's Ask an Ecologist Anything. And I'm the ecologist in question here. You can ask me anything, apparently. Some things I might even provide an answer to. Some of those answers might even be right. So I'll start by thanking the people who have joined as members on the Nature Bats Last YouTube channel. And those people include, since we last did one of these live streams, Brent McKinney. Oh, and my apologies for mispronouncing names, which they'll certainly do on pretty much all the names to follow. Brent McKinney, Bob Minji or Mingi, Nico Mentale, Sanchin Matu, Eric Lair, Nick Salno Smith, Douglas Bressay, maybe, One Machine 77, Ted Bone, and Vincent. Yes, I love that you used just one name there, Vincent. If everybody could do that, and the name was Bill, I'd have a much easier time with this whole thing. So then, I think there was a question earlier. I can't remember who it was from. Somebody asked something about the rate of change declining as the global average temperature of the planet increases. And I have a response. This information was included in my long essay, Climate Change Summary, formerly known as Climate Change Summary and Update, until I stopped updating it. A few years later, I realized I shouldn't call it Update anymore. This paper was published on February 9th, 2016 in Nature Communications, which is part of the family of Nature journals, which are premier journals in terms of the peer review process and their high standards. The article is titled Transition to a Moist Greenhouse with CO2 and Solar Forcing. It's by Max Pop and two additional colleagues. And this is from the abstract where they write, CO2-induced forcing as readily destabilizes the climate as does solar forcing. The climate instability is caused by a positive cloud feedback and leads to a new steady state with global mean sea surface temperatures above 330 K or 330 degrees Kelvin. For reference, 330 K is about 57 degrees Celsius. Currently, the global average temperature of the planet is about 15.5 degrees Celsius. About 15.5 degrees Celsius. Let me repeat that, about 15.5 degrees Celsius. And the temperature stabilizes at 57 degrees Celsius, by which point I can guarantee there will be no life on this planet and will not have been for a very long time. So I'm looking forward to the planetary temperature stabilizing at that point, although none of us will be in existence to read or hear or observe anything about it. One thing I wanted to do during this live stream is ask you a question. And specifically, I'm now at the point where I am making and releasing at least 4 videos each week. On Monday, I do an episode of Extinction Monologues. On Tuesday, I don't have anything scheduled. On Wednesday, I do Science Update. On Thursday, I do Self-Reinforcing Feedback Loops. On Friday, I do the new series called Explained, and I spend a little time trying to interpret, translate peer-reviewed papers that I rely upon in my recent work. I try to make them accessible for the general public. So that's the point of those videos. And that comes out to 4 videos a week. I think I ought to be releasing something regularly on Tuesday. So I would appreciate your input on that. Now, one person has already given me input, Daniel, and I don't want to spoil it by telling the rest of you, and therefore disrupting your creative process. So all other ideas welcome. I do have one thing in mind. And although we generally release the science update on Wednesday, the others are, there's no set pattern that has been established yet. And I'm perfectly willing to change the patterns. If, for example, I get interviewed, I want to release that interview as quickly as it's available. So I might shift around the release of things like self-reinforcing feedback loops or the explained series. So any ideas, please include them here in the chat. So already we're having some conversation about who's the boss in this house. I see that's the important stuff. We moved right into that domain. So anybody got any ideas?
I thought that was a no-brainer.
For those with no brains? Wait a minute. So anybody with any additional ideas of a theme or a series of videos that you would like to see, please let us know. And bear in mind that I will be shooting these videos, so they will be of extraordinarily poor quality, with things like police cars showing up a minute after the video supposedly ended, and blank spaces of 20 seconds long of just pure black in the middle of the, there's no accounting for anything that happens there. All right, I'm looking at the notes here. The largest iceberg in the world broke off the other day. Yes, it did. And it's enormous. And the next day there was an article, can't remember if the New York Times or the Washington Post, citing a well-known climate scientist as saying it's probably not because of climate change and it will have no effect whatsoever. What's it going to take? Terrible Tuesday is a fine idea, but what kind of content would you like to see other than Terrible Tuesday? I sometimes call it Apocalypse Tuesday because a year or so ago on some social media, I don't even remember what, somebody accused me of predicting human extinction next Tuesday. Every Tuesday, I'm predicting human extinction. So now I call Tuesday Apocalypse Tuesday, thanks to that person, who of course was anonymous, was using a pen name. Alrighty then. Come on, somebody ask a question, preferably one I can't answer. Of course I'll answer, even if it's not the right answer. Trent Black, you got to be the funniest guy on here. Well, somebody posted a comment yesterday, the day before, on the troll farm, and I removed it because it annoyed me, and that doesn't happen very often because a lot of the comments annoy me and I let them go anyway. But this one, this person accused me of having no sense of humor whatsoever. Said it would be a lot easier to tolerate my prognostications and my educational efforts if only I had a sense of humor. So, what have I got to do? Wait, do I need a clown, a big red clown nose? Maybe some bigger shoes? I don't know. So that conversation is now open for business as well. Ideas for a theme, a series of videos for Tuesdays, and also how does Guy get a sense of humor?
You also might want to hire Raza to write for you because he asks some really good and hilarious questions.
That's a good idea.
So for example.
Wait, Pauline, can you make a note of this? Grateful Dan says, how about videos on teaching humans how to live in planetary hospice? Each episode can be a new theme.
Mhm.
I like that. So if you could write that down, because I'm incapable of doing more than one thing at once.
Okay, writing it down.
And also Anand with an unpronounceable last name. My apologies. An idea for Tuesdays: do a series of the messages left by important intellectuals. That's a fine idea. The last words or the last public words of certain people. That's a fine idea. Like Henry David Thoreau, for example. Okay, this might not fit very well, but his last words apparently were moose, Indians. I don't know how I could interpret that into anything meaningful, but there you go.
At least he didn't say moose turd pie.
Right, exactly. Ghost of Diogenes. People are having trouble making sense of what's going on, but can you explain what you think those in positions of power might be doing with the truth about our predicament and the time that remains? I strongly suspect those in positions of power who enjoy enormous privilege are trying to ensure that they have that they retain that enormous privilege for as long as they possibly can. And I suspect the wiser ones among that group are living with urgency and living with gratitude. Now, I don't know because I'm not privy to those circles. But I would imagine there's a whole bunch of people besides the 20 of us here, or whatever it is, that know what's going on in the world, know that we are headed for loss of habitat for human animals around the world, that we are headed for the catastrophic meltdown of more than 400 nuclear power plants as a result, that this overheating alone, because of the rate of environmental change, will cause loss of habitat for human animals. There must be many people who know this by now. What are they doing with it? Well, I can't imagine we have things like people announcing they're running for president of the United States next time around. Surely there are people smarter than that, people who know about James Anderson's line about the chance there will be permanent ice in the Arctic after 2020 is essentially zero. Surely people know about that. And supported by a more recent statement just less than a month ago from Jennifer McKinnon at UC San Diego and Scripps Institution. So what are they doing besides enjoying their enormous privilege and ensuring that they retain it? I don't know. I wish I knew. I wish they'd welcome me to breakfast and we have a conversation about it. Oh, sorry. I have to look at this. Oh, I thought somebody was asking me a question or providing advice. But instead, it's a thank you to Tom Beck. Thank you, Tom, for joining this channel as a member of the Nature Bats Last YouTube channel.
Joey did ask a question. I'll read it. It says, he asks, can you elaborate on aliens and your NASA friend that shared you the Dr. Greer video? Carol Rosin.
I didn't watch the video. And no, I won't elaborate on aliens. I think the chances that we have been visited by aliens, by interstellar beings beyond this solar system, are enormously high. But I know nothing about that. And if I were to comment one way or another, no, of course there have been no aliens. Or yes, of course there have been aliens. I shook hands with 3 of them the last time they came down last Tuesday. No matter what I say, I will be accused of being a paranoid conspiracy theorist. So I have enough problems the way it is trying to transmit my message rooted in evidence and love. So for me to comment on something that I'm no expert about would not be wise. And I didn't watch the documentary film. I think Pauline watched it. So she can feel free to comment.
But you could talk about Carol.
I could talk about Carol Rosin. Carol Rosin Carol Rosin is a friend of ours. She lives in Western Oregon. She has interviewed me several times, and those have been posted on the Nature Bat's last blog, GuyMcPherson.com. You can find it in there. She seems like a perfectly rational human being. She's in her mid-70s, and she was, at the time, the highest ranking female member of NASA when she worked for the federal government. She knows things. She claims that she has been to Area 51 and seen the evidence, including the bodies of the aliens. And I've heard all kinds of stories from people I believe, from reputable people. And that's why I think there is essentially 100% chance that we have been visited by interstellar beings. But until I shake hands with one, until we have a conversation, I can't say for sure. And all of this information that I am transmitting is secondhand. I've never met any of these beings. I've never received a message from them, to my knowledge. My cavities don't work that way in my teeth. So until I have some sort of evidence in front of me that tells me with great rigor that we have been visited, then I'm just not going to go there, because what's the point? I don't know. I think you might as well ask the guy bagging your groceries at the grocery store, because he or she is as much an expert as I am. I'm just more visible than the people bagging the groceries at the grocery store. Thank you, Stella Azul, for joining the Nature Bat's Last YouTube channel. Tom Beck, you'll have to clarify. Do you think we will survive if ASI becomes viable in the next 5 years? I don't know what ASI is. Anand Datwani, sorry for the pronunciation again. How do you see the ongoing COVID-19 crises around the planet intersect with abrupt climate change? I'm stunned again that we're still here. I can't believe we didn't lose sufficient aerosol masking at the right time or the wrong time of the year to cause altered biological activity, and therefore altered ecological activity, and therefore cause crop failures and our rapid demise. That said, the first and third waves came at the perfect time of year in terms of biological activity. And as a consequence, the reduction in carbon dioxide emissions of up to 17%, as measured and reported in peer-reviewed literature, and also the regional reductions in industrial activity, starting around Wuhan, then to India, then to Europe, and so on, were very favorable in terms of our continued existence on the planet. So I think we got lucky in terms of the timing, and also in terms of the spatial pattern with which industrial activity declined throughout the course of the pandemic. Now, the pandemic is not over yet, and I read quite recently that this is about to be the first pandemic in history with a fourth wave. Obviously, a direct response to our poor actions in dealing with the first three waves. So we're headed for a fourth. I don't think we're out of the woods yet, but if things continue as they have so far, then I don't see us losing habitat around the planet anytime soon as a result of the pandemic. So that's good news. No, Grateful Dan. I have not reached out to Professor James Anderson. This might be a good time to point out that we're going to do 2 more radio shows. We will have Dr. Andrew Christ as our guest in June, and July we will have no guest. It will be Colleen and Kevin and I taking your calls and celebrating the 7 years that Nature Bats Last has been on the radio. So,
and that will be the last show.
And that will be the last episode of Nature Bats Last on the Progressive Radio Network. I suspect the Progressive Radio Network will continue to air episodes as they've been doing all along, once a week. And they will be old episodes as they've been doing for years now. They run an episode once a week, even though we only put out a new episode once a month. So good for them.
So ASI means Arctic sea ice, maybe.
Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, we can survive longer if Arctic sea ice increases or somehow manages to stabilize right where it's at over the course of the next 5 years. Then I think we can get up to 5 years. Now, obviously, there are other threats at an existential level, as I pointed out in my recent writing. We're headed for, if we maintain industrial activity, not counting dozens of self-reinforcing feedback loops and ignoring the aerosol masking effect, we're still headed for Pliocene-style climates as early as 2030. So ignoring those important features and still arriving at Pliocene as early as 2030 tells me that we're in serious trouble between now and then regardless. So I don't think we have long, regardless of how we act and what kind of good luck we experience along the way, because all that good luck aside, we've, as a species, we've pretty much taken every wrong turn in the road as we came to it. I don't think Lyme disease has decreased the numbers of non-human mammals significantly. I mean, I'm sure there have been populations that have been significantly impacted, but I haven't read anywhere that, for example, the total number of white-tailed deer or the total number of porcupines or the total number of blah, blah, blah has declined in response to Lyme disease. Kevin, that's a good question. Can we experience a Canfield Ocean within the near future? Yes, and I think there are signs reported in the peer-reviewed literature that we have already arrived in some places. So in local and maybe even regional areas, we are seeing signs of Canfield Ocean events. And I'm pretty sure I reported on that in the long essay, Climate Change Summary, and or extinction foretold, extinction ignored, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Dan Keith, thank you for joining this Nature Bats Last YouTube channel as a member.
Dan Keith is also responsible for the beautiful memes that we have available, our little emojis with the hearts. Thank you, Dan, for all those. They're lovely.
Tom asks, do you think some will survive if artificial superintelligent ancestors becomes viable in the next whatever? No, because we still need habitat. We depend greatly upon other species or we wouldn't be here at all. And without those species, there are things we cannot do. We think we're amazing, and at some level we are. We have these big brains and they've gotten us into all kinds of trouble. I don't think they're capable of getting us out of some kinds of trouble, like, for example, loss of habitat. In addition, as pointed out by Strona and Bradshaw in the November 2018 paper in Scientific Reports, we're headed for the loss of all life on Earth with a 5 or 6 degree global average temperature rise. Now, I just pointed to a paper that indicates we're headed for, what, 57C is within the realm of possibility. And that's 41 degrees Celsius higher than we are right now. We can't live without other species, period. We can't eat. There's nothing to pollinate the crops, the food. There's nothing to clean the water. We can't live without other organisms. And yet we continue to act as if they don't matter. Raza, we don't have a new home. We're staying in a relatively small apartment while we're looking for more permanent housing options. And yes, Trent Black, you're absolutely right. If you want to see animals decline, just look at Australia. Everything is functionally extinct. They certainly have been losing the bats in a hell of a hurry, and most of the other mammals and flying organisms too. Mimi German, good point. I encourage folks to wander into the desert to ponder habitat. Look around at what's alive there. It's the species that have evolved within those kinds of environments through natural selection to survive and even thrive. But you can't. I challenge anybody on this live stream to go spend, 6 months in the desert, any desert, without any external support. Okay, I'll even let you have a tent and as much plastic as you want to take with you. Still think you'll have a really difficult time surviving 6 months, much less long enough to reproduce. And remember, that's one of the necessities within the definition of habitat, is that species must be able to reproduce. Thank you, Andy, with the unpronounceable last name, for joining this Nature Bats Last channel as a member. We greatly appreciate the members who are joining and who have already joined and are part of this conversation. Yes, Pradeep, the pandemic in India right now is stunning. The consequences of the pandemic and the societal response or lack of response has been terribly sad, remarkable. The kind of thing that most people in a so-called first world country in this world today, in 2021, would never have imagined could be happening, and yet it's happening right in front of our own eyes. Okay, if I want to be funny, shave my eyebrows. That's a fine idea. So we had an interesting thing happen today. Been getting up into the low 80s here in Vermont, which is, to hear the locals tell it, almost lethal temperature. So the owner of this apartment sent her husband and son up to put in the air conditioning that's in the windows. What, when I was a kid, we called shaker boxes, because they just shake all the time. Don't produce much electricity for an enormous amount of money paid for the electrical bill every month. But anyway, these two guys showed up and put in the air conditioning units. Oh, I feel so much better already. The one right next to me is set at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Barely even touching it. I'm right in front of it. I'm 4 feet away, and I really can't feel it cooling down at all. But I can just imagine the electrical meters going. What else we
Just
got?
set those dollars on fire.
Yes, Leslie, we're ending NBL on PRN, and let me explain why. But we will be continuing this series of live streams, Ask an Ecologist Anything. When we switched to a once a month format instead of a once a week format, which was a long time ago, 2015 or 2016, we did that because I realized that we were reaching so few people every week that it was a lot of work for not much reward. And over the course of the last 4 or 5 years since then, there has been nothing to change my mind about that. The reason we selected this date, July, is that we started in August. So we can blame the 7-year itch. We started in August of 2014 when the first episode aired. And here we are, almost 7 years later. Very few people seem to be influenced by the episodes of the radio show. A lot of times it's a lot of fun. A lot of times it's a lot of work. It's always a lot of work. And it's a lot of work for no pay. It's stressful, at least for me, and probably for the people listening. So it's just time for me to move on and do other things that I enjoy doing more. Our time is short. I just, given my long-time message, encouraging people to pursue what they love to do in their lives, I think it's time for me to do the same thing. That's a good idea. Pauline, would you write that one down? From Anand. The Gods Must Be Crazy 2.0. Actually, I think there was a sequel to that original, The Gods Must Be Crazy. So this would probably be 3.0 or maybe 2.5. To humorously chronicle aspects of what the human species has evolved to. Mm-hmm. That's a fine idea. And it could be, I will wait until we're near the end of this episode of this live stream before I will tell you the idea that Daniel Reich had. Did I write it down? Because otherwise I'm not going to remember. Oh, I remember.
The last words of famous people.
And so I'll wait until the end, but I think there's only half a dozen or maybe 10 episodes that I can come up with on that topic. So maybe we'll do some mix and match with these other ideas as they show up.
David Lutz says you look like the actor in the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy.
I see that. I saw the movie, but it was like 1,000 years ago. And I'm pretty sure I didn't look like this then.
I saw it 2,000 years ago. So
really?
Yeah.
Did I look like this then?
I don't remember. All I remember is the Coke bottle falling out of the sky. That's it.
Do you have any thoughts on the areas that will collapse first? I live in Arizona, extreme drought, under constant fire threats, and of course the extreme heat factor and all the other problems it causes. The thoughts that will collapse first. Yeah, the places that already have. India comes to mind. Coastal Alaska, where indigenous people have lost their homes and have been forced to move inland. There are many such places. There are islands in the South Pacific where people have relocated as a result of losing their homes. When I was touring in Western Europe 6 years ago, many of the people I encountered in Western Europe complained bitterly about the people from Africa, Northern Africa, and the Middle East moving into Western Europe and, quote, stealing their jobs. They weren't going there to steal the jobs or to go to European Disneyland. They were going there because they had lost habitat already. Collapse is well underway. It's been underway for years. If you're fortunate enough to live in a place where you still have water coming through the taps, food being delivered to the grocery stores, and gasoline at your favorite service station, then you're one of the lucky ones. I'm stunned we made it this long, given the projection of the ice free Arctic in 2016, plus or minus 3 years. And yet we're still here. Rinse and repeat for a dozen other factors that could cause our demise, climate change related and not. And yet here we are. So I don't know when the last person will die. I do know that it won't be me. So that's something. Because guys still talk to puppets. Of course I still talk to puppets. Why would I not? Some of my most intelligent friends are puppets. Interesting question, Andy. Looking at the global temperature increase graph for the last century, the increase was slowed for a few decades after 1940. Is it possible this is when aerosol masking really came into its own? I think that was a result of World War II. And I say that because the 1929 paper by Anders Engström, 1929, had almost identical the level of aerosol masking that James Hansen and colleagues reported in December 2011. So I think for the most part, the general level of aerosol masking at the global level has been similar for the last approximately 100 years. Were there changes after or in the wake of World War II or during World War II? Yes, I think so. And I think that's because industrial activity increased or at least shifted during the 1940s. So I said increased, I'm sorry. I meant either shifted or decreased. The industrial activity, for example, American car manufacturers shut down all domestic production during World War II and spent all of their effort producing military vehicles and military supplies. And so I suspect there was a reduction in overall industrial activity, and not just because a lot of countries and regions were being bombed, but because of this change in the pattern of what was being produced. So I don't know that anybody's done any research on that, but it's an interesting question. So it could be that aerosol masking increased during World War II, or at least shifted in various places around the country. So if the measurements, as I suspect they were, most of the temperature measurements were probably being made in Western Europe, the United States, Japan, relatively few places around the world relative to today. So there might have been some bias as a consequence. Thank you, Prepper Survival Skills, for joining the Nature Backslash YouTube channel as a member. Do I care about fluctuating Bitcoin prices? I don't even notice. I mean, Occasionally I read in the news that they're like $1 bajillion for one Bitcoin or something like that, but I can't keep track of the numbers. And one of the reasons I don't have very much money is because I never paid attention to money. So no, I don't care about fluctuating Bitcoin prices.
That's funny.
The Himalayas, the mountain range, have been referred to as the third pole. That's exactly right. Well, being near a freshwater source give an extra few days. Well, it in fact might. And this is why when we lived in Florida and when we get a home that we live in more permanently here, we intend to have a few weeks supply of food and access to water. So the leading candidate for a house we will buy in this neighborhood has a little brook running through it. So it has fresh water, and we have Berkey water filters, which are stunningly effective at filtering water. And we have some food that we call apocalypse food that lasts for a long time in storage. So if we make it to the point that we have a home of our own, we'll move that stuff out of a U-box 10 or so miles from here and nearer to us, so that we have the option to persist a little while after things fall apart locally. And I don't think that's unreasonable because, that's the kind of thing we did when I was a kid. When I was a kid, we lived 3 hours drive from the nearest real grocery store. And so we would only go to the grocery store once a month. We'd drive to Lewiston and back, and we'd stock up on a lot of food, and we had a freezer, and we grew a little bit of our own food, and we always had a few weeks supply of food because you never knew when your planned trip to Lewiston was going to be disrupted by 7 feet of snow that fell on the road. I think it's perfectly reasonable to live in a similar manner today, to have enough food and water so that you have the ability, if the grocery store shuts down for 4 weeks because of, say, a pandemic, or because it's the end of industrial civilization in your area, that you're able to make a decision about how much longer you want to carry on. So that's the approach we've been doing. And prepper survival skills, you get both names correct. Thank you, Rita Tremblay Schmidt, for that very generous donation. And it's accompanied by love and hugs, so that's even better. I'll take those to the nearby grocery store, the love and hugs, and see what they'll trade them for. I was there today. I counted the number of people I saw in the store. There were 16 people, and 5 of them were not wearing masks. 3 of those not wearing masks worked at the grocery store, and the sign on the door says masks required. 3 of the 5 people I saw in the store with no masks worked at that store, and they couldn't be bothered to wear a mask. I can't believe we haven't gone extinct already. Okay, I'm going to reveal the secret now. So we have about 15 minutes left in this episode of a live stream. So, see what just came in? Yes. All right. Daniel Reich had this idea of a series of video episodes of things that could cause our extinction, because it's not just climate change that could cause our extinction. There are other things as well. So I could look up some evidence from reliable sources and figure out what those things are besides climate change. Obviously, I would feel compelled to throw in climate change as well. But surely there are other things. In fact, there's a recent paper, where was that published? BBC, I think. You know, what used to be television stations and radio stations now do everything. They do all media. So I'm pretty sure it was the BBC that had this article titled, "Are we going to go extinct?" or "Are humans going to go extinct?" or something like that. And they proposed our extinction not as a result of climate change. They never even mentioned that term, climate change. Not as a result of, in fact, anything that made a lot of sense to me, but because of overconsumption. And they didn't make the link between how we consume and what we consume and how that will lead to our extinction. But I think it's a worthy exercise to ponder how much humans have consumed, claiming it's our birthright to use everything. And think about the impacts around the planet of consuming as if there's no tomorrow. So I don't think the article did a very good job at pointing out the links between how much plastic crap we buy and why we're going to go extinct. But it's a fine question to ask, and it's worthy of a video episode for me, just rattling on about the links between what and how we consume, how we treat that as a birthright, and what the consequences are, including, according to this paper, human extinction. So there are other things as well. I remember seeing there's a seafoam question, but I forgot what it was. And let's see, Pepper survival skills. Apparently you asked a question too, so I missed both of those, sorry. Oh, one of your questions was, is there a limit of questions I can ask? Within reason. Well, I don't think you've asked any so far. Oh, here we go. Personally, I do believe in climate change, but my belief is more in the direction of Earth's cycles. But the more I study climate and habitat, the worse it gets. Well, yes, climate changed prehistorically as a result of something called the Milankovitch cycle. That Milankovitch cycle is based on a slight wobble in the Earth's rotation that plunges the planet into an ice age. So yes, that has happened many times in the deep past and has led to much higher temperatures, global average temperature, than the planet is experiencing right now, and much colder than the planet is experiencing right now. But we know, based on science, that there is a direct link between greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and the warming of the planet. So we know with great certainty that the planet is warming because of the greenhouse gases we're putting into the atmosphere, most notably the ones associated with burning fossil fuels. So yes, there are, quote, natural patterns, and then there's what we're doing. David Stoney says the IEA in May of 2012 continued the fiction that global warming by 2100 can be held to 1.5 degrees. I read a paper claiming the same thing today by so-called climate scientists. We are beyond 1.5 degrees already. And I can't fully explain why. I can't even imagine, even if you are a paid scientist, even if you stand to lose privilege as a result of telling the truth, which is that the planet is much closer to 2 degrees C above the 1750 baseline than it is above at 1.5 degrees C above the 1750 baseline, and nowhere close to 1 degree. Also, how can you ignore that the advisory group on greenhouse gases, shortly before it transitioned to become the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, concluded that 1 degree C is the absolute upper limit before we trigger self-reinforcing feedback loops. And then add to that, how can you ignore climate writer and speaker David Spratt in October, maybe November 2014, pointing out that we have already triggered many self-reinforcing feedback loops. So I don't know how you, as a climate scientist, can continue to tell these stories beyond the ability to maintain privilege, beyond being able to go to work every day and get paid a lot of money to spin stories. So we have people like Michael Mann, for example, who surely knows better than the nonsense he spews on a regular basis. And, you know, you could blame the fact that he has a teenage daughter, and so he is forced to lie. But I would say, if you have a teenage daughter, that's one more reason to tell the truth. How can you lie to your teenage daughter about what's going on in the world? How can you not prepare your own child for what is happening in the world that is a direct result of you and me and Michael Mann? How can you continue to lie? I don't know, but I see it every day. What is the best book or textbook on climate change and habits? Yeah, a lot of books do have political tones, which I don't like. I want truth and science. Let's tackle that next time, because I'm having a mental block right now, and I can't come up with a single one. Don't laugh at me, Polly.
Of the 14 books you've written?
Yeah, but those don't count. I'm going to try to sell my own books on here. James Hansen wrote a book called Storms of My Grandchildren, came out in 2007, and it's recommended reading, although he has changed course, I would say.
Peter Wadham's.
What did you say?
Peter Wadham's book.
Right, Peter Wadham's book about, what is it called?
Is it not Chasing Ice? End of Ice? Ice? Oh no, that's
no, that's Dar's book, which I wouldn't recommend.
It's a play on the book about the war.
So
title.
Just look up Peter Wadham's name, and his recent book is worth reading. Wadhams, Peter Wadham's. Ozer points out that recently 172 participants took part in a 100-kilometer ultra run. Yellow River Stone Forest, China is where this happened. During around 21 of the 172 people died because of abrupt climate change. Hail, temperature drop, wind, because completely unsuited to being out there running through the desert. Comment? So many things I could say. So many of them are not suitable for mixed company. The world has changed. Is it not time we admitted that? You know, even if you don't accept that our actions, daily and otherwise, should be different as a result of abrupt, ongoing climate change, what about a pandemic? Is that not enough to change people's behavior so that we should not be running these ultra long races in very challenging physical conditions? You know, if you're in charge of an event and people have to sign a waiver to participate, maybe you should think twice about holding that event. Because there's plenty of stupid people out there who are willing to sign a waiver to do anything. Man, getting people to take responsibility for themselves. Prepper survival skills, you can go to guymcpherson.com, and one of the tabs there, media, I think, leads to written works, and near or at the top of that page are my books, and they aren't all climate change related, but some are, and some might be too. A Farewell to Ice, that's Peter Wadham's book. Thank you, Luigi. Yes, A Farewell to Ice. Anyway, a few of my recent books have to do with climate change, mostly though because the evidence is so readily available from so many sources. I focus on how we respond as individuals and societies to the fact that we're in the midst of abrupt, irreversible climate change. If you're interested in evidence, you might just go to the long essay at guymcpherson.com. There's a 32,000 word essay called Climate Change Summary. And when you click on the green thing, I think it is, the top thing that shows up will be Climate Change Summary. And if that doesn't convince you that anthropogenic climate change is ongoing and poses a serious threat to our way of life, then I have failed catastrophically. And you can get your money back for reading that. Oh, wait, it's free. I'll pay you $20. I'll pay you $20 if you read it and you think, yeah, climate change is just no big deal.
I think the Extinction Foretold, Extinction Ignored essay is a really good one to read because it's a little shorter.
It's much shorter. It's absolutely much shorter, and it depends completely upon peer-reviewed evidence, except on occasion when a corporate media outlet admits something catastrophic is going on with climate change. Then I include that, but all of the evidence is linked directly to peer-reviewed papers. So yes, and it's a much easier read, so you might start there. But it doesn't go back to the idea of anthropogenic climate change, which is what the Climate Change Summary does. It tackles that issue head on, because when I started writing that, there were still a lot of people who thought that all climate change was a result of natural cycles, of things like the molecular cycle and so on. Ice ages and hothousers just came in these patterns, and there's nothing that humans were doing.
Don't piss your friends too much off, Prepper. Guy has lots of stories of how that doesn't go very well.
How much time do we have left? Well, I try really hard to rely only upon the work of others. In the 12 plus years since I left active service at the University of Arizona, that has been my approach. I am not collecting primary data, so I rely upon other people to do that. James Anderson, the Harvard atmospheric scientist famous for discovering the link between chlorofluorocarbons and the disappearing ozone hole in the Antarctic, was interviewed after a presentation he gave in Chicago. He was interviewed by Forbes. The paper was released in Forbes on January 15th, 2018. So about 3.5 years ago. And he said, quote, "The chance there will be permanent ice in the Arctic after 2020 is after 2022 is essentially zero," end quote. I'm going to read that again. This is a very reputable source, James Anderson, the atmospheric scientist at Harvard who discovered the link between chlorofluorocarbons and the ozone hole in the Antarctic. Quote, "The chance there will be permanent ice in the Arctic after 2022 is essentially zero." That was in Forbes, published on January 15th, 2018. You can track it down all by yourself. More recently, Jennifer McKinnon who has a professorial appointment at the University of California, San Diego, University of California, San Diego, and also has an academic appointment at Scripps Institution, also expects the first ice-free Arctic in 2022, consistent with James Anderson's comment that the chance there will be a permanent ice in the Arctic after 2022 is essentially zero. So both of them are predicting an ice-free Arctic in 2022 for the first time. And then the following year, we will experience the catastrophic implications of that increasing time of an ice-free Arctic, things like crop failures and completely distorted circulation patterns in the atmosphere. McKinnon made her comments upon release during an interview, release of a paper in Nature Communications. And to find both of these, you can go to guymcpherson.com on April 30th, 2021, and find the post there. Look through all of the sources, and you will find those two sources. Jennifer McKinnon made that announcement in a CBS News article that was posted on April 23rd, 2021. So my post on April 30th, 2021 includes her line about an ice-free Arctic in 2022. And also I include James Anderson's work from, 3.5 years ago, approximately. So I think that's two pretty good pieces of evidence that we will have an ice-free Arctic for the first time in 2022, with catastrophic impacts to follow in 2023. I would be surprised if there were habitat for humans by the end of 2023. Will there be humans? The so-called bunker people who are living in a bunker life? Maybe. And I would suggest that those people don't last until 2026, because they will either kill themselves or be killed by the sociopaths around them for trying to sneak away with the last can of peaches. So I think we have at most until the end of 2023, and I'm living accordingly. So Tom Beck, I think I just answered your question in answering that question. So if not, please hit me up with a question again. That will certainly produce a more than 2C world, considerably more than 2C world. And more importantly, the very rapid rate of environmental change is what's going to lead to our undoing. It's not only the temperature reaching any particular number that is going to cause our demise. As with every other organism on the planet, we are poorly adapted to rapid environmental change. So that was the point of the November 2018 paper by Strona and Bradshaw in the open access journal Scientific Reports. That was the point, that the rate of change is occurring so quickly that species will not be able to adapt from an evolutionary perspective. That's what will cause the extinction, that along with what they termed co-extinction, which simply means that we can't persist in the absence of the species that we depend upon. They said something like, organisms cannot persist in the absence of resources, and by that they meant other species. All right. Have the
Welcome
goalposts
tonight.
really been moved, or are all these data still measured from circa 1750? Luigi asks. Everybody's changing the baseline all the time. I frequently see the comparison being made to 1980 to 2010. Are you kidding me? That's when the Industrial Revolution started, was in 1980? Just because we elected a B-rated actor that year doesn't mean that was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. You could argue that was the end of intelligent life on Earth, at least in the Oval Office. So people routinely shift the baseline to make it look as if it's not as bad as it really is. But if you go back to 1750 and you follow the work of Sam Coran at the Arctic News blog, you will determine that we are much closer to 2 than we are to 1. And the self-reinforcing feedback loops, according to David Spratt, started at 0.5 C above the 1750 baseline. We've already triggered dozens of self-reinforcing feedback loops. Check for a list of something like 60 or 60 some at guymcpherson.com in the long essay, Climate Change Summary. About a third of the way in, you'll see this long list of self-reinforcing feedback loops that have already been triggered, not that lie in the future. All right. Thank you very much, John Rewilding, for joining the Nature Last channel as a member. Prepper survival skills. I was a bunker guy too. I left active service at the University of Arizona to pursue a life in which I would learn to grow and store my own food, preserve and store my own food. I became a master cheesemaker. I became an incredible gardener. I planted hundreds of fruit and nut trees, turned roughly 2.5 acres into prepper's paradise in the middle of nowhere, in the wilds of southwestern New Mexico, near the last free-flowing river in the state, the Gila. And then I learned about the aerosol masking effect. And then I learned more about the aerosol masking effect. And then I learned even more about the aerosol masking effect as more information was forthcoming. And by the time it became clear that a pretty minor reduction in industrial activity causes a very rapid global average temperature increase, that was enough to convince me that I can stop living off grid and continue my educational efforts in a more meaningful way. Nobody followed my example. So now I do this instead of doing that. And living that way might have added 6 weeks or even 6 months to my life at the end of my life. I would rather live fully now than do that kind of work that I didn't particularly enjoy, surrounded by people who didn't really enjoy me at all. Kirsten Strand, yes, organ failure and intense heat is certainly a grim picture. And we saw, as I indicated, we saw symptoms when we were living in Belize for people who were working outdoors, carpenters, that sort of thing. War first? Yeah, that's what we're doing. That's what we've been doing. Essentially the entire history of the United States. We've been, quote, at war, except as Bill Hicks says, calling it war is really unfair because in a war, there are 2 armies fighting each other. This is conquest. This is not war. Yeah, Gonry Wellen, love your stuff. Thoughts on the 2019 September paper regarding aerosol masking by Drew Schindel and company. I did an essay on that. So just look in the search box at guymcpherson.com, type in Drew Schindel. I'm sure it'll take you right to it. They conclude that aerosol masking is only around 0.9 degrees warming. Well, that's ridiculous, but I'm not surprised. You can always find good news in the peer-reviewed literature. I try to rely on information that seems more fitting with the data we have than those kinds of stories. Okay, we're going to wrap up here in about 3 minutes. Andy asked, what are some key non-human species that will make large impacts when they become extinct? Plants come immediately to mind, pretty much all of them. More importantly, probably mycorrhizal fungi that serve as the link really between the inorganic world, things like carbon, and uptake by plants. So I'm not going to take the time to get into that now, but it's worth spending a little bit of time studying the impact of mycorrhizal fungi on net primary productivity.
Not to mention phytoplankton.
Phytoplankton is kind of a big deal, providing about half of the oxygen we breathe. Yeah, so they're important. Good point.
We're at 3:12.
So thank you, everybody. We're going to wrap this up now. And I agree with you, prepper survival skills. Now is for very young people, it's probably not the right time. And you know better than I do because I don't have young people in my life. I don't know when to tell people. It depends upon their level of maturity. It depends upon how you tell them. You know, reminding people that their lives are short is not necessarily a bad idea. You don't have to tell everybody you come across that they're going to be dead next Tuesday, that we're losing habitat so rapidly, that we're going to lose habitat for our species by the day after tomorrow. So that's ridiculous. But to remind people that the human experience has always been short, I don't think is such a bad deal. And learning to express gratitude, learning to express love for the people in your life as a result of understanding the finite nature of our existence, those can be among the most rewarding outcomes. So I would encourage that. We'll try to put together another one of these within the next couple or 3 weeks. We're a little constrained here by the infrastructure in this tiny apartment, so please bear with us. And thank you everybody who participated today. Thanks especially to the new members, to all the members who are leaving comments and so forth. And we greatly appreciate it. So thanks very much. Until next time. Remember,
wait, before we go, don't go yet. A very quick update on the Mirror Reflection Project. There's nothing happening right now. So we just wanted to let people know to check out the mirrorreflection.com page, website, if you want to learn a little bit more about.
And mirror, it's spelled MEER, mirrorreflection.com. Will take you to the latest information. And Dr. Tao, who heads the project, is very, very busy preparing the experiments for this coming fall. So he has been unable to update the website. He also has what I would consider a relatively typical academic perspective, and as a consequence, his sense of urgency is not as strong as what I would like to see. That said, I think he already deserves the Nobel Peace Prize for the magnificent work he's been doing in his spare time on the Mirror Reflection framework. So please take a look. Thanks everybody for joining in.
Take care, everybody. Now I have to figure out how to log out of this.
Quick, turn it off. How do we turn it off? Oh no, it's still going.